Vladimir Putin stood in front of the Russian Federal Assembly in early 2026 and declared that Western sanctions had become a source of positive change for Russia. Weeks later, he was scolding his own officials over a shrinking GDP. That contradiction tells you everything you need to know about the true state of Russia in 2026. On the surface, Russia looks like it is holding. The war in Ukraine continues. The military keeps fighting. State television broadcasts confidence. Putin remains in power. But underneath that surface, something is rotting, quietly, systematically, in ways that are now visible to anyone willing to look past the official narrative. One of Russia's most distinguished establishment economists, academician Robert Nigmatulin, a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences and laureate of the USSR State Prize, told the Moscow Economic Forum in April 2026 that Russia's economy is experiencing an existential crisis. He warned that the existing situation is a direct threat to the stability of Putin's rule under conditions of war fatigue and horrific corruption. House of Commons Library. This was not a Western critic. This was not a Ukrainian propagandist. This was a senior member of Russia's own academic establishment, standing inside Russia, delivering a verdict that the Kremlin's own propaganda machine cannot easily dismiss. History has seen this pattern before, and the channel that covers the rise and fall of empires has a responsibility to tell you exactly where it leads. The first thing you need to understand about Russia's current situation is how deliberately the illusion of strength has been constructed, and how carefully the evidence of weakness has been hidden. Since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russian state has stopped publishing or restricted access to a growing number of economic and demographic statistics, including detailed trade data, reserve figures, and population indicators. Limiting what can be measured makes it easier to sustain the claim that everything is under control. Fortune. Think about that for a moment. A government so confident in its economic resilience that it stopped publishing its own economic data. The official story, promoted relentlessly by Russian state media and amplified by pro-Kremlin voices internationally, was that the Russian economy had proved the West wrong. Sanctions had failed. Russia had pivoted to Asia. The ruble had stabilized. GDP was growing. Parts of that story were technically true. Russia's GDP grew by more than 4% in both 2023 and 2024. Those numbers are real, but they conceal something critically important about what actually drove that growth. Wikipedia. Much of Russia's recent economic activity has been driven entirely by wartime spending. The government poured enormous sums into weapons production, the military, and security services. This created the illusion of growth, but it is not real prosperity. Tanks, ammunition, and missiles do not raise living standards or build a modern civilian economy. They are the opposite of productive investment, converting labor and capital into destruction rather than prosperity. Fortune, an economy growing because it is manufacturing weapons to destroy itself, is not a healthy economy. It is a fever, a temporary spike in activity that masks the underlying infection. And by 2026, that war-fueled boost is fading. Fortune, the most revealing data point, comes not from any Western think tank or Ukrainian government source. It comes from Russia's own railway freight numbers. Rail transport is the lifeblood of Russia's industrial economy, carrying the vast majority of its goods and over a third of its export volume. By the end of 2025, total freight volume on the Russian railway network was 13% lower than in 2021, hitting its lowest point in 16 years. And by the first 2 months of 2026, the Russian economy officially entered negative territory, recording a GDP drop of 1.8%. The Jerusalem Post empty train cars do not lie. Official GDP statistics can be massaged. Railway freight cannot. What is happening in Russia right now is not a single crisis. It is 4 simultaneous structural collapses happening at the same time, each one feeding and accelerating the others. The financial pillar, Russia's national wealth fund, its sovereign rainy day reserve, fell from $117 billion in 2021 to $31 billion by late 2024. That is a 74% depletion in 3 years. By early 2026, the liquid portion of the fund had dwindled to below 2% of GDP, leaving almost no room for further drawdowns. Al Jazeera WGLT Russia's key interest rate stood at 15.5% in February 2026. Debt servicing costs are expected to reach nearly 9% of federal budget expenditure, double the share of 2021. The government is paying an enormous and growing share of its entire budget simply to service the debt it has accumulated, financing the war. WGLT overdue business debts to suppliers hit $109 billion by the end of January 2026, signaling a full-scale non-payment crisis spreading across the civilian economy. The Jerusalem Post, the energy pillar oil and gas have historically funded between 30% and 50% of Russia's entire federal budget. That foundation is cracking. Russia's largest oil company, Rosneft, reported a 70% drop in profits in the first 9 months of 2025. Sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil have reduced profits, increased risks, and forced Russia to rely on costly middlemen. WGLT, the finance ministry, designed its 2026 budget around an assumed oil price of $59 per barrel. Federal revenues contracted by 16.9% in the first half of 2025. The money that built Putin's political system is running out. GIS reports, the labor pillar, by the end of 2024, Russian firms faced a labor deficit of 2.2 million workers, with 70% of Russian businesses reporting they were short on employees. At least 219,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine, most of them working-age men. Hundreds of thousands more have permanently left the labor force due to injury. GIS reports, a modern economy cannot function without workers. Russia is running out of them. Not gradually but catastrophically, while simultaneously demanding more workers for weapons production, frontline service, and an aging civilian population that requires increasing care. The demographic pillar, people over 65, already account for 18% of Russia's population, a proportion expected to rise to 24% by the middle of the century. The war has dramatically accelerated this demographic crisis. The young men dying in Ukrainian fields are the same generation that should be building Russia's future economy, having children, and sustaining the tax base that funds public services. GIS reports Russia is consuming its own future to finance its present. Here's where the fallen empire perspective becomes essential, because every single warning sign visible in Russia today appeared in the Soviet Union between 1979 and 1991, in the same sequence, at the same pace. The dissident economist Igor Lipsitz has stated that Putin's Russia is in worse shape than Leonid Brezhnev's Soviet Union, implying Russia is on the verge of collapse and rapidly degrading. House of Commons Library, that comparison deserves to be taken seriously, because the Brezhnev-era Soviet Union followed a path that historians can now map with precision. The Soviet Union in the late 1970s looked formidable from the outside. Nuclear arsenal, global military presence, satellite states across Eastern Europe. An ideology that still attracted followers across the developing world. Underneath, the economy was stagnating. Military spending was consuming an impossible share of GDP. The labor force was aging. Agricultural productivity was collapsing. The bureaucracy had become so corrupt and so ossified that, as academician Nigmatulin noted about Putin's Russia today, none of the leadership's economic decrees had been implemented since 2012. Meaning the entire power vertical had effectively broken down. House of Commons Library. The Soviet Union didn't collapse because Ronald Reagan outspent it militarily, though that accelerated the timeline. It collapsed because the structural rot had reached a point where the system could no longer self-correct. The gap between what the Soviet state claimed to be and what it actually was became too large to paper over. Mikhail Gorbachev understood this. His perestroika, his restructuring program, was an admission that the system required fundamental transformation to survive. But transformation of that magnitude is impossible without dismantling the political power structures that depend on the existing system remaining unchanged. Nigmatulin recognizes the same paradox in Putin's Russia today. Economic restructuring presupposes political restructuring, which is impossible as long as Putin remains in power and believes his survival hinges on continuing the war. House of Commons Library. This is the trap that has consumed empires throughout history. The reforms needed to save the system are the same reforms that would destroy the ruler's grip on power. So the ruler chooses his own survival over the system's, and the system slowly dies around him. Beyond the economic statistics, beyond the geopolitical analysis, there is a human signal that historians have learned to treat as one of the most reliable early indicators of imperial decay. When ordinary people stop planning for the future, the empire is already in its final phase. In interviews conducted by BBC journalist Steve Rosenberg at the end of 2025, many Russians were asked what they hoped for in 2026. A striking number answered with a single word: peace. Several interviewees remarked that they no longer planned their lives months or years ahead. One summed up the mood with devastating clarity. 5 years? If I look ahead 10 days, it's good. Wikipedia. That single sentence is one of the most historically significant things said publicly in Russia in years. Not by an opposition politician, not by a dissident in exile, by an ordinary Russian citizen, expressing in 9 words what the economic data takes pages of analysis to document. Empires do not collapse only when their armies lose. They collapse when their people lose faith in the future. When the psychological contract between the state and its citizens, the implicit promise that tomorrow will be better than today, breaks down irreparably. The Soviet citizens of 1988 had that same exhaustion in their eyes, that same unwillingness to plan beyond the immediate present, that same quiet, private acknowledgement that the system was no longer working, even if saying so publicly remained dangerous. Russia is not collapsing tomorrow. Let me be precise about that, because precision matters more than drama in geopolitical analysis. Russia's caught in a bind. Any attempt to rapidly cut defense expenditures would trigger economic collapse, but maintaining current military spending levels perpetuates stagnation. Moscow can neither sustain indefinite military spending nor safely transition back to a civilian economy. GIS reports that is not a description of a country on the verge of sudden collapse. It is a description of something potentially more dangerous. A slow, grinding, irreversible deterioration with no clean exit available. The Soviet Union took over a decade to complete its collapse after the structural rot became undeniable. Russia's rot became undeniable in 2022. The trajectory is not a cliff edge, it is a long slope, with the bottom not yet visible but the direction impossible to mistake. Empires rarely announce their endings. They perform strength until the performance becomes impossible to sustain. They publish official statistics until the statistics no longer match the empty train cars. They declare victory until the soldiers stop believing in the victory they are dying for. Putin declared victory as the official word of 2025. His citizens answered with a single word of their own: peace. When the ruler and the ruled are speaking completely different languages about the same reality, the fallen empire is already taking shape. This is the fallen empire, where the patterns of history are never truly past, they are always present.